My wife 34F and I 35M have been living in Houston, enjoying what I thought was a great marriage. About 11 years ago, during a visit to her parents' place, her best friend Emily cornered me, demanding to know why I hadn't proposed yet. My wife stood by silently, clearly agreeing with her friend's pressure. I got the hint pretty quickly. I cared deeply for my wife, so their persistence made me happy and motivated me to start planning our future together. Fast forward 2 years, we tied the knot, and now we have 2 beautiful daughters. Our wedding day was one of the happiest days of my life. I'd always dreamed of being a good husband and father. My wife wanted a big wedding, and we made it happen, even flying in some of our relatives from Puerto Rico. We weren't wealthy, but we provided well for our kids, and they were always taken care of. Back then, my wife seemed like an amazing person. She was smart, fun, and had a great sense of humor, which you don't always expect from someone as stunning as she was. She was a good mom, and our daughters, who are now 7 and 4, adored and respected her. Our oldest even started mimicking her, something I always pointed out. My wife's beauty was undeniable. I loved her bright smile, her beautiful brown eyes, and especially her amazing figure. She had this stunning curvy shape that made it hard for her to fit into jeans, whether she wore a sexy dress or just some tights. Her slim figure was always noticeable. She loved how she looked, and my mom always thought she had a bit of an ego because of it. She might have been right, but it didn't bother me much. I work at a renovation project facility, while my wife runs her own nail salon. It wasn't surprising. She's always been a fashionista, even though she'd deny it. She kept up with the latest trends and needed the newest things, whether it was the latest iPhone, new heels, or designer clothes. It made me roll my eyes, but since it was her money, I kept my mouth shut. Things changed when she became a mom and had to cut back on her spending habits. Instead of maintaining her glamorous lifestyle, she started focusing more on our daughters. Now, she's content with last year's iPhone model and trading designer clothes for Disney-themed outfits that our kids love. She only pulls out her nice clothes for holidays or vacations. I also had to cut back, but it didn't matter because our kids were our priority, and my family meant everything to me. Everything seemed fine until we ran into her old friend's ex-boyfriend. We were at the supermarket, doing our usual grocery shopping. Our oldest reminded us about her favorite Pop-Tarts, so my wife sent me with her to grab them. After a lengthy debate over which flavor to pick, we returned to find my wife chatting and laughing with some guy. When my daughter interrupted with the Pop-Tarts, my wife introduced me to him. She said this guy was Jordan, the ex-boyfriend of her old friend, Lila. It took me a minute to remember who Lila was, then I recalled they used to work together before my wife started her business. Jordan seemed friendly enough, and I didn't think much of it at first. They caught up, and it was odd to see her so cheerful and animated around him. After a bit, I signaled that it was time to head home for dinner, and Jordan said goodbye with a laugh. On the drive home, my wife mentioned how surprised she was to see Jordan. She was even more shocked to learn that he and Lila had broken up. When I asked when she last spoke to Lila, she said it had been about 4 years, so they were definitely out of touch. Initially, I thought that would be the end of hearing about Jordan, but I started noticing that my wife was in regular contact with him. They talked on the phone and chatted on social media. He'd mention me occasionally, which made me feel included, so I didn't worry too much. But their conversations became more frequent and longer, sometimes late into the night. My suspicions started growing around Super Bowl Sunday. On the day of the Super Bowl, my wife was on the phone with Jordan when I asked her a question. After she answered, she told me Jordan wanted to talk to me. Surprised, I took the phone, and he asked if I planned to watch the game. I joked that I'd be rooting for the Lions, to which he laughed and said he would too. He suggested we watch the game together, but I told him we'd have a bunch of kids over, and he probably wouldn't want to deal with that. He laughed it off, and I handed the phone back to my wife. I thought that was it, but a couple of hours later, my wife came back and said Jordan wanted to talk again. He invited me to a Super Bowl party at a friend's place, suggesting it might be a good escape from the chaos at home. My wife even offered to call her brother to pick up his kids earlier so we could go. So we decided to head out after her brother picked up the kids. We arrived just in time for the halftime show. It turns out the party was thrown because someone was a die-hard Bengals fan, hoping they'd lose. And they did, losing to the Rams, which definitely shut him up for the night. After having a good laugh at the Bengals fans' expense, Everyone settled in to enjoy the rest of the party. But I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling watching my wife interact with Jordan. She was getting too cozy with him, and I felt excluded from their conversation. I figured maybe I wasn't being sociable enough, so I tried to join in more. At one point, I asked Jordan why he and Lila had broken up. Jordan casually mentioned that he and Lila had only been dating casually and it wasn't serious. My wife laughed and said she was surprised because Lila seemed really into him. After a while, I decided to grab another Smirnoff from the cooler on the porch. I mingled with a few people outside, but when I went back inside, I looked around for my wife and saw them chatting in a corner. I thought about heading over, but something about the way they were talking gave me a bad vibe. Jordan was standing too close, and it felt like he was being a bit too flirty. I hesitated and stayed out of sight, trying to get a read on the situation. I saw him hold my wife's hand while she giggled shyly. Then she walked into the kitchen with him following closely behind, his eyes glued to her rear. All I could think was, what the hell? But I moved in closer to get a better look. My wife was standing by the sink, chatting with another woman while Jordan stayed in the background, ogling her. The woman noticed and must have said something to my wife, who turned around and smiled at Jordan. Then she just turned back and continued her conversation, like it was no big deal. Usually I love how my wife dresses, but at that moment, her yoga pants felt like a problem. She kept glancing back at Jordan, almost like she was teasing him, while he continued to check her out. It felt like they were sending each other signals, and it was making me paranoid. I hoped I was just imagining things. When the woman finished talking, my wife came back into the living room and spotted me. She casually asked what the guys on the porch were talking about. I told her nothing much and mentioned that I was ready to go. She said she wanted to stay a bit longer, but I reminded her that her brother was with the kids and we needed to relieve him. After saying goodbye to everyone, including Jordan, we headed home since we both had work the next day. On the ride back, I couldn't hold back any longer. In the car, I told her it seemed like Jordan was hitting on her, and she laughed it off, acting like I was overreacting. She dismissed my concerns, saying I was imagining things. I let it go for the moment, but decided to keep a closer eye on their interactions after what I'd seen. It was clear Jordan was checking her out. The more I watched, the more suspicious I became. My wife always had her phone with her, constantly brought up Jordan in conversations with me and her best friend Emily, and started staying up late talking on the phone. One night, I directly asked if she was talking to Jordan, and she just gave me a look before admitting she was. She hung up shortly after that. I eventually asked her to stop talking to him so late, suggesting they chat during the day instead. She claimed she was busy talking to Emily then. When I told her it was inappropriate to be talking to Jordan late at night, she just laughed and said I was being paranoid. She dismissed my concerns as nothing, but she did stop mentioning Jordan after that. I guess she thought it would keep me from getting upset, but it didn't. 2 days ago, I reached a breaking point. My wife had a day off and said she was going to Emily's to do her mom's nails. I knew about this plan, so I wasn't suspicious. Later that evening, our youngest daughter asked for pizza, and I thought it was a good idea since I was craving it too. So I decided to call my wife to tell her not to worry about cooking. When I called, it went straight to voicemail. I tried again, same result. I started wondering why her phone was off. It was unusual. After half an hour with no response, I decided to call Emily. Emily answered, and I asked if my wife was still there. She said my wife had left, which was surprising since she was supposed to do Emily's mom's nails. Emily said my wife got a phone call and left suddenly, telling Emily to send her mom to the nail salon tomorrow instead. This was strange because Emily was practically like a sister to her, and leaving like that felt out of character. After hanging up, I called around, but no one knew where my wife was. That left me with one suspect, Jordan. I was furious. I remembered Jordan mentioning the street he lived on during the Super Bowl party, but I didn't know the exact address. Still, if my wife was there, I knew something was going on. I grabbed my keys ready to head out, but then remembered our kids were still home. I called my mom to see if she could babysit, but she didn't answer. My best friend Ethan was my last option, so I called him. He was having dinner with his girlfriend, but when I told him I suspected my wife was cheating, he was shocked and asked if I was serious. I explained everything, and he said he couldn't come over but offered to watch the kids if I brought them to his place. Annoyed, I packed the kids up and drove across town to Ethan's house, which took about 30 minutes. When I got there, Ethan asked if I knew Jordan's exact address. I told him I only knew the street, and he looked at me like I was crazy. The street was long, and he questioned if I was really going to drive down it searching for them. I said yes. As I was about to leave, Ethan stopped me and suggested taking his car instead, so my wife wouldn't recognize it if I was wrong. He handed me the keys and told me not to do anything stupid. He offered to come along, but I declined, not wanting to drag him further into this mess. I left the kids with him and headed out to find my wife, hoping I wasn't too late to catch her in the act, but also hoping I was wrong. After a long drive, I reached Jordan's street. Slowly driving down, I searched for my wife's silver Kia. It was a sketchy neighborhood, but I didn't care. All her suspicious behavior had led me to this point. To my dismay, I eventually spotted her car. Not only did I see her car, but I also saw her and Jordan outside. She was in a pink sweatsuit, and Jordan was wearing just a white tank top, shorts, and flip-flops. It looked like she was getting ready to leave, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Jordan, practically half-dressed, was standing too close to her again. As I drove past, I lost it, shouting to myself, "He fucked her. I know he fucked her." I couldn't think of any other explanation. Now, I had to race home and beat her there. Luckily, the kids and I got home before she did. I put them to bed and waited for her. About 40 minutes later, she finally walked in, looking unhappy to be back. She didn't say a word to me and went straight to the bedroom. Her silence was infuriating. I followed her and demanded to know why her phone was off. She claimed it had died and needed charging. I asked where she had been, and she repeated that she was at Emily's. I told her Emily said she left, and she brushed it off like it was nothing. She seemed irritated, saying it didn't mean she wasn't there. I couldn't believe we were having this conversation. I asked if she left Emily's to be with Jordan, and she hesitated before saying yes. She then told me it didn't matter, and accused me of having a problem with Jordan for no reason. She said she was tired and wanted to drop it. She asked if the kids had eaten, and I told her we went out. Without asking anything else, she went to the living room to watch TV and be on her phone. Since that night, she's been a different person. She barely talks to me, constantly texts in the dining room, and looks at me like she's trapped. It's like she's blaming me for something when all I've ever done is try to make her happy. And who conveniently has their phone die in the middle of the day? I don't know what to do. My gut tells me something's wrong, but I can't say for sure if she cheated. Her behavior is full of red flags, especially after the Super Bowl party. They've been talking all day. He ogled her at the party, and now she's meeting up with him secretly. It's hard to believe they're not doing anything. They'd talk on the phone for hours, liking each other's pictures on Facebook. Then this guy started calling late at night. When I told her it seemed inappropriate, she said I was overreacting. When she talked to him, she'd laugh and giggle, and even try to teach him Spanish since we're Puerto Rican. It got to the point where I had to find her last week because she wasn't where she claimed she'd be. She was supposed to go to her best friend Emily's house to do Emily's mom's nails, but she flaked after Jordan called her. Her phone went straight to voicemail, so I assumed she was with Jordan. I called my best friend Ethan, who let me borrow his car to find her. Driving down Jordan Street, I found them, and it bothered me that he was barely dressed, just a white beater, shorts, and flip-flops. Driving back to Ethan's house, he asked what I saw. I told him, and even he admitted he thought Jordan had slept with her. I agreed, especially since Jordan had so few clothes on. If I were dressed like that when someone came over, my wife would tell me to put some clothes on. He looked like he had just woken up or something. Ethan asked what I planned to do, but I didn't know at the time. I thanked him for babysitting my kids and surprisingly made it home almost 40 minutes before my wife. When she came back, she looked guilty. When I asked where she was super vague and wouldn't answer directly. Eventually, I just had to drop it, especially since I didn't catch them in the act as I planned. People here said it was going to get worse, and it did. Now, she looks at me like I'm her prison guard and doesn't really want to talk to me. She only talks to her friends on her phone, doesn't interact with the kids, and treats them like a chore. She just sits in our little dining room area and texts. I didn't even know what to say to her. What was even worse was that, thanks to my schedule, I couldn't really stop her from cheating. My wife knew my daily routine, and I'm sure Jordan did too. Between my job, taking care of our kids, and obligations to my mom, they apparently met up while I was out. I knew this because while I was out, I'd try to call her and she'd never answer. My wife's schedule was more flexible than mine, especially since she was her own boss at her nail salon. Whenever I got home, my wife wouldn't be there, especially if she didn't have to pick up the kids from school. When she came back, she'd be vague about where she'd been. This really messed with my mind and gave me what I think is anxiety. I'd be with my mom, thinking of my wife with another guy. This all started after she left Jordan's house that night. If it wasn't for this community, I'd have been much worse off. If I had been blindsided by this, I don't know what my mindset would have been. But after being told to calm down and start monitoring them for the truth, I had to man up. After doing just that, I found out today that yes, Jordan was indeed sleeping with my wife, and my plan worked out perfectly. That weekend after work, I bought a voice-activated recorder VAR and put it in her car. At first, I tested it out when I took the kids to McDonald's, and it worked pretty well. Then I put it in my wife's car. Since it's possible they hooked up in the car, it should pick it up. It should even pick up any incriminating conversations they might have. Doing this made me feel crazy. I couldn't believe this was my life. The best advice I got was to act like I wasn't concerned about Jordan. It was a lie, but I had to get used to it. Not bringing him up and acting like everything was fine made her ease up a little. It was hard, but I focused on getting the truth. When I told Ethan about this, even he thought I was a genius. A few days ago, I managed to retrieve the VAR from my wife's car and listen to its recordings. The audio was a mix of different conversations, but one thing stood out clearly. My wife was talking to Jordan. They were driving somewhere, and though the music was on, I could make out some of their conversation. Jordan was definitely flirting with her, calling her sexy. My wife giggled in response, and though I couldn't catch everything she said, she didn't stop him. I heard Jordan tell her to stop somewhere, which led to a brief silence. After that, it sounded like a bunch of guys got into the car, and they drove off. The conversation became harder to follow with everyone talking over each other, but it seemed like she was driving them around. Amid their chatter, Jordan mentioned he wanted to come over. Although parts of the conversation were muffled, I clearly heard my wife say to him, "She has to leave early, so come over." That was the most telling part of the VAR recording. After that, they just talked and laughed, with one guy calling Jordan thirsty. I tried to deduce who my wife was talking about when she mentioned someone leaving early. It didn't seem like it was Emily, despite their close relationship. It wasn't her mom either. The most plausible guess was the girl who runs the salon with my wife. Even though she was a teenager learning to do nails, it made the most sense. Nobody else fit the description. I called my friend Ethan to see if we could swap cars for the day. He agreed and, after hearing what I'd discovered, was shocked. He called her a high-priced hoe and hoped I'd catch her this time. Knowing how I operate, she must have anticipated me leaving after helping my mom with her yard. I couldn't cancel on my mom, so I told her I'd only stay briefly due to being tired from work. My mom was disappointed, but her neighbor offered to help out. Around 9, I arrived at my wife's shop as it was closing. Located in a strip mall, the setup allowed me to hide among the other cars, especially since I was driving Ethan's car. Inside, Jordan was unmistakably present, confirming my suspicions. Only my wife Jordan and Sherry were left. My wife was dressed to impress, and Jordan was all over her. I saw Jordan with his arms wrapped around my wife, kissing her neck and grabbing her behind. They were making out against the wall while Sherry watched. After about 5 minutes, Sherry said something about leaving, and they smiled and waved her off. Jordan and my wife then headed toward the basement. I was furious. I couldn't believe that despite everything I had done for her, she would betray me like this. Jordan had always given me bad vibes, and now I saw why. I grabbed my VR and went to the salon. Sherry had just finished gathering her things, so I waited for her to leave before making my presence known. When I called out to her, she looked terrified. I told her not to lock the doors and that I knew everything. She played dumb, claiming she didn't know what I was talking about, but I said I had watched them the entire time. I called her a fat lying woman, and we got into a huge argument. She tried to deflect, saying it wasn't her fault my wife was cheating. I accused her of being messy and told her to get out of my way. She said I wouldn't catch them because the basement door was locked. I asked why they'd locked the door if Sherry already knew what was happening, and she said they didn't want anyone coming down. I pulled out my phone and called my wife. Sherry decided to follow me as I made my way to the back. My wife didn't answer, so I began banging on the basement door, which was indeed locked. After banging 3 times and demanding they come up, there was still no response. Turning back to Sherry, I asked her how long she knew about this. She claimed to have known about Jordan for about a month and that the affair had started recently. She said Jordan would come in on his break, and they would go down to the basement. She added that they would talk about what happened the next day. I asked if she knew Jordan was Lila's ex-boyfriend, and she confirmed my wife had told her. When I mentioned we had kids, she said she wasn't concerned with that. I told Sherry that was fine and that I'd use her statements in court. When she asked what I meant, I showed her the VAR and told her she could leave. I then drove back to Ethan's, who had been a great help, not just with the car, but also with watching the kids. He and his girlfriend consoled me. While Ethan and I were talking, Emily called. I should have expected it, but it was the last thing I needed. I picked up, and she said my wife wanted to talk to me tomorrow, and that she had already told Emily everything. I asked to speak to my wife immediately, but Emily refused, saying she knew I would blow up. Emily said if I came over, she'd call the police, and both she and my wife wanted me to calm down. I responded with a sarcastic, "Yeah, whatever," and hung up. When I got home with the kids, I was overwhelmed and emotional. My anxiety kicked in again. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. Despite doing everything right, it seemed I had done something wrong. After being married for so long, I never expected this. The worst part was realizing it wasn't a one-time thing. He had been seeing her consistently. Now my whole world was about to change. I'm anxious to hear what my wife has to say tomorrow. The ball is in her court, and if I don't like what I hear, I'm filing for divorce. My mind is racing, and I'm questioning whether leaving Ethan's house was a mistake. After everything that had happened, I took the kids over to my mom's house for the weekend. She insisted on keeping them, which was actually a relief. Despite her blaming me for the situation and expressing distrust, I was grateful for the help. My mom's reaction was intense. She said it was because I married my wife and now had to deal with the consequences. My aunt, who had come in from the kitchen, looked shocked when she heard the details. She sat down on the couch, unmuted the TV, and just stared at the screen, clearly overwhelmed by the drama. Even though my mom's harsh words stung, I was glad the kids were safe and away from the chaos. I needed time to process everything, and being alone helped. I was still fuming when Ethan called. He asked if I'd talk to my wife, and I told him no. I made a crude joke about her being with someone else, and Ethan responded with a grim acceptance. He said she might not even call, and that was fine with him. I was focused on moving on. On Saturday, while I was trying to clean the house, I heard the sound of keys in the door. I must have been lost in thought because I didn't hear her car pull up. My wife and Emily walked in. It was a jarring sight. My wife was wearing a gray Nike sweatsuit, no makeup, and her hair was messy, held together with a rubber band. She looked like a completely different person, one filled with shame and remorse, which was probably why she appeared so disheveled. I wasn't used to seeing her like this. She had always been someone who took great care of her appearance, and seeing her like this made me realize how deep her shame was. It seemed like she was trying to project an image of vulnerability, perhaps because she had been caught. Emily asked me to let my wife speak, and I reluctantly agreed. Emily then said something to my wife and stepped out onto the porch. I told my wife I was surprised she even bothered to come and talk to me. She admitted she felt she needed to after I saw her with Jordan at the salon. She said she was scared to come home after that. She asked where the kids were, and when I told her they were with my mom, she seemed disappointed. She expressed frustration about me telling Sherry everything. I told her Sherry had ratted her out to save herself. My wife mentioned that Sherry and she had argued and that Sherry hadn't returned to work. I said I didn't care about Sherry's big mouth. My focus was on her betrayal. My wife threw her hands up in resignation and admitted I was right. She apologized, saying she never wanted me to find out about her affair with Jordan. I told her that her apologies couldn't fix what she had done, that she had betrayed me deeply. I asked her how she could act like Jordan was just a friend while throwing our relationship away. She said she was sorry and that her fantasies with Jordan had spiraled out of control. She explained that when her friend Lila was dating Jordan, she would tell my wife how great he was and show her their sexting conversations. My wife said she found Jordan attractive when she saw him and that their conversations had sparked something in her. She admitted that she liked him and that he had complimented her a few times. I told her I had noticed something was off when we ran into Jordan at the supermarket. I didn't remember her giving him her number. She said he had asked for it, and their texting quickly turned into flirting and sexting. She admitted she started hanging out with him and his friends, which included the night she was supposed to be with Emily's mom. When I mentioned I had seen her with Jordan outside his house that night, she asked how I knew. I told her I had been looking for her. I pressed her if she had slept with him, and she could only respond with a sorry. She said Jordan had convinced her to go to his house by telling her that everyone was there, but when she arrived, it was just the two of them. He started getting touchy and kissing her, and things escalated from there. I was furious and called her a stupid woman for ruining our marriage. She responded with more apologies, saying she knew she messed up. She said she could never expect me to trust her again, and she wasn't asking for that. Instead, she revealed she wanted to pursue a relationship with Jordan. I was incredulous and told her she was crazy. She said she had always fantasized about Jordan and didn't realize it would lead to this. When Jordan told her he and Lila weren't serious, it made her happy. She admitted she hoped something would happen between them, and it did. She said when he was with her, she didn't feel guilty. Their meetings became planned and frequent. She confessed she should have talked to me about her feelings instead of cheating. She said she didn't think it was fair to me, but she wanted to be with Jordan. I asked if she was seriously considering leaving her family for him. She said she wished she had pursued him before marrying me, and that Jordan wanted a relationship with her because she liked him more than me. I asked if she had been involved with Jordan's friends too, but she denied it, though she admitted he sometimes asked her for rides. I was angry and called her a free Uber service. She rolled her eyes and didn't respond. At that point, I was emotionally exhausted and frustrated. I was trying to process everything she had said while coming to terms with the reality of our situation. The trust was shattered, and the future seemed uncertain. My wife told me she wanted out of our marriage because she couldn't be with me while constantly thinking about someone else. I reminded her that she couldn't pursue Jordan at the time since he was already involved with Lila, and we were still together. When I asked her what Lila would think of her wanting to be with Jordan now, she said Lila wouldn't care because they were only casually dating then. I pointed out that Lila would still likely think less of her for her actions, and I believed she'd be right. My wife wanted to end things on good terms and left with Emily, who had been peeking in throughout the conversation. They drove off, and I was left feeling a mix of anger and resignation. As much as I hated to admit it, my wife was right about one thing. I would hate being in a marriage where she was constantly thinking of someone else. She seemed delusional, but I was prepared to let her find out the hard way. Living alone was hard, and the betrayal made me question if relationships were always this disposable. I had hoped that after 9 years of marriage, we'd have a stronger foundation, but apparently not. The thought of my marriage unraveling so easily was disheartening. By Monday, I called off work to meet with a lawyer and began the process of filing for divorce. The lawyer said I might be entitled to alimony from my wife's nail salon and that custody of the kids could be arranged in my favor. My mom had been helpful with the kids, but I was upset to find out she'd spoiled them and told them that their mother was leaving to live elsewhere. When my oldest asked me about it, all I could do was shake my head in frustration. Despite my mom's missteps, her actions inadvertently helped my case. After picking up the kids, I drove by Jordan's house and showed them where their mom wanted to live. The sight of the rundown house and the group of guys on the porch didn't appeal to them at all. My oldest said, "Not for $1 million," which confirmed their disinterest in living there. During my lunch break, I called my wife to let her know I had filed for divorce. Her response was a terse, "Okay." She wanted to come over to talk to the kids, but I told her my mom would be picking them up from school that day because I had other things to do. She insisted on talking to them and asked if she could pick them up herself. I told her that if she really wanted to see them, she should go to my mom's house and pick them up. I warned her it wouldn't be the smartest move, knowing how my mom could be. My wife got upset and accused me of always hiding behind my mom. I reiterated that if she wanted to see the kids, she should go to my mom's house. Frustrated, she hung up, clearly wary of my mom's potential reaction. Since then, I haven't heard from her. I sent one final text stating that our remaining discussions should focus solely on the divorce and the kids. My primary concern now is my daughters. Just because my wife has given up on them doesn't mean they're alone. I'm determined to provide for them and protect them from the fallout of their mother's choices. Jordan will likely continue his player lifestyle, and I hope my wife considers that while she's busy with him. It's no longer my problem, and I'm focused on moving forward. My wife's actions have revealed her flaws and deep-seated selfishness. The way she discarded her values for Jordan and forced me into this situation feels profoundly unfair. This is my final update, and I want to thank everyone for their support. Some people are just meant to be left behind, and that's exactly what I plan to do.